So one thing I do want to get to is why do you think there is this weird difference between the consumer computer market and the smart lighting market? Because clearly the smart lighting guys are like, please make third-party apps. Like that's like their selling point is everything works together. Why do you think there is
Yeah.
this weird difference?
Well, I guess the point there is it seems like not all of the smart lighting companies think the same
Oh,
way
sure, sure.
like, well, Philips is the weird one because Philips has Hue, and
Mm-hmm.
Hue is very well documented. They have a really good developer resource. And then they also have Wiz, which is like their Wi-Fi bulbs, because
Okay.
Hue uses like a Zigbee bridge, and
Mm-hmm.
then Wiz just connect directly to Wi-Fi. I think Wiz might now have documentation, but when I started working on them, they did not.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seemed like, I think though it might have actually been two different products that were just acquired by the same brand.
Right.
So, but yeah, some of the smart lighting companies really are open to third party development.
Mm-hmm.
Nanoleaf was another one that I supported more recently.
Mm-hmm.
The code was actually submitted by someone on GitLab, and it only worked for like the first generation Nanoleaf.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up buying a Nanoleaf kit to test it on, but I ended up getting the second generation. So I looked up their documentation and wrote the controller for the second generation. And then we ended up with a controller that worked for all of them because of
Mm-hmm.
that, because their documentation was just really good. And with the work that he had done and the work I had done combined, we ended up with a pretty good controller that worked for all those different products. And I think they might have a new line out that we don't support,
Mm-hmm.
but that wasn't out whenever we wrote the controller.
For anyone who doesn't
But I was
recognize the name
impressed.
Nanoleaf, that's the streamer light.
Yeah, those like triangle panels that you put
Mm-hmm.
on your walls. Um, yeah, so those they had really good documentation, but I think those companies, because they're not part of a PC, so like I mentioned
Mm-hmm.
before, like Razer, Corsair, Logitech, the big names in like PC peripherals, they have an SDK,
Okay.
and I think their SDK is kind of what they intend you to use instead of like talking to the hardware directly.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't realize is that they're, by only supporting Windows and their proprietary software, they're excluding a big chunk of PC gamers, or a chunk of PC gamers who don't want to put up with that or use a different operating system. Also, Mac users. I mean, we like to talk about the Linux community. That's where I'm most interested. But
Mm-hmm.
I did end up buying a Mac because of OpenRGB, to get support on Mac as well, because there were people saying, well, I'd like to be able to control RGB on my Mac, and RGB controls Windows only. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I mean, we're 90% of the way there. All we have to do is get a USB interface and a serial interface and I2C interface that work on Mac. And then that just automatically brings in support for all these devices we've already reverse engineered.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, why not? Why not add another platform? So um, I think the companies are all laser focused on Windows means gaming.
Right.
And if gamers are just going to download the gamer software
Mm-hmm.
and run that, and that they'll be happy with that. And the game companies will use our SDK to make gamer lights happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't care about people who are using them for other purposes. Whereas the smart light people, I mean, your product is standalone. It doesn't connect to a computer directly. It's its own thing on the network, and so you have to talk to it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're more open to giving you the protocol to talk to it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is still the issue of the cloud-based stuff in the smart home world that
Yep. Yep.
is still quite an issue. I mean, I run Home Assistant
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of the smart lights when I'm not using OpenRGB and other smart home stuff, and the local control availability there varies
Mm-hmm.
greatly between devices. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
You say that gamers are just going to download the gamer software, but my housemate, he plays with some ridiculous DPI because he refused to
Uh-huh.
download Razer Synapse. He's just like,
Yeah.
whatever it used on
I,
the mouse, that's
I
what I'm going to
mean,
use.
I've seen so many sentiment online that mimic that people, even people who are just Windows users, are like, I don't want to download this bloatware to
Mm-hmm.
change my mouse settings, especially when you have to download Razer's bloatware and Corsair's bloatware and Logitech's
Yeah.
bloatware if
Yeah.
you don't go and buy a Razer everything, because that's the way that they tie you into their ecosystem. And but as the end user, that's not fun. We don't like having to run all of these different software packages, and a lot of them you have to leave open all the time. Like some of them will even like only let your settings stay active while they're open. Like as soon as you close them, oh, you're back to default settings, and it's a mess. Well, so yes, the SDKs for all the developers out there of these software programs, the SDKs are not enough. They're not enough. Not even enough for the Windows users, it seems. So